All right, well, I'm going to kick it off here. I want to say welcome to Lake Research and Management in the North Woods. And you might think about this as the Forest County edition of this little experiment that we thought we'd try out. My name is Jake van der Zanden, and I'm the director of the Center for Limnology at UW Madison down here in Madison, Wisconsin. And joining me right now is the co-host, Scott Van Egeren, who you'll see on the screen. And Scott is from the Wisconsin DNR, based in Rhinelander, and he does a lot of work on water quality and lake issues in Forest County. I just want to say a little bit about sort of the UW Madison role in all of this, and then I'll pass it on to Scott, who will talk sort of about the broader range of partners in all this. UW Madison, as an organization, has a longstanding interest in lakes. The field of limnology, which is the study of lakes, actually started at UW Madison in 1875, and we've been interested in conducting research on lakes ever since then. Part of the reason why we've been able to do this is because of Trout Lake Station. Trout Lake Station is a field station that our current Trout Lake Station director, Gretchen Garish, will tell you all about, but that has been a base for lake research in the Northwoods. Trout Lake Station is based in Vilas County, and as a consequence, we have very strong ties in Vilas and in Oneida County, but maybe less strong ties with some of the surrounding area. So on the suggestion of a friend from Forest County, we thought we'd put together a lakes-themed webinar, and that the theme would be having to do with activities in Forest County. For us, it was a way to share some information about Trout Lake Station and the things that we do. First and foremost, our research, also the student training, and then the broader work that we do relating to lakes that has to do with working with stakeholders and the work we do informing lake management. But then if you step back, so much of this work relating to lake management and improving the health of our lakes isn't necessarily done by us. There are a tremendous number of groups that all work together in this regard. And so at this point, I'm going to pass the baton over to Scott to talk about the Lakes Partnership and sort of all of the other groups that sort of participate in this joint effort of trying to improve the health of our lakes. So Scott.
Thanks, Jake. Hi, everybody. I'm Scott Van Egeren. I'm the DNR lake biologist, in part for Forest County. And I'm here in a way representing the Wisconsin Lakes Partnership. For those of you that don't know, the Wisconsin Lakes Partnership is a partnership between the DNR, who can offer funding, technical assistance, the UW Extension, who offers education, some research and outreach, and the local lake organizations in the state, and citizens in those organizations, because you're the ones who live on lakes. There aren't enough of us professionals, and you're our eyes and ears. So thinking about the Wisconsin Lakes Partnership, I guess I would extend that to include the university system, the universities of the state, the Native American bands or tribes in the state, and local governments, the county government, Forest County, and town governments. So you can kind of understand that the Lakes Partnership is made up of a lot of organizations and partners with overlapping roles and responsibilities related to lakes and water quality. So in my mind, when I talk to Jake about this meeting, the utility I see in this webinar is it's a way to begin connecting everybody in the audience here to professionals from many organizations that can help you with lake management, as well as connecting you to other lake organizations that maybe have the same goals and objectives as you. And my hope for this meeting is that we start to foster a stronger network of people communicating with each other around a desire to protect and restore lake health. So that's all I'm going to say for now. I'm going to just take a moment to introduce our panelists that will be speaking to you today. So first we'll have Gretchen Garish. Gretchen's the director of the UW Madison Center for Limnology Trout Lake Station in Vilas County. We have Noah Lodig. Noah's a research scientist at the Trout Lake Station. After Noah, we'll have Greg Matsky. Greg is our DNR fisheries biologist for Forest and Florence counties. We'll have some time after Greg for some questions and answers with all of you. After that, Carol Warden will speak. Carol is an aquatic invasive species specialist, and she splits her time between working at the Trout Lake Station with the UW and working for the DNR. We'll hear from Patrick Goggin. Patrick is the statewide lake specialist for UW Extension Lakes, and he works out of our Rhinelander DNR office. And then we'll hear from Allie McCulloch. Allie is our statewide Lakes and Rivers team leader for the DNR Bureau of Water Quality. And then I'll finish it off. And again, I'm Scott Van Egren, the DNR lake biologist for Forest County. So I guess I'd just like to engage people online a little and ask that maybe just as an icebreaker, and there's a lot of people, so we can't actually hear from all of you, but maybe just in the chat, if you would let us know what your home lake is and what county it is in, and then maybe list one issue that you'd like to address on your lake, one thing you'd like to protect or restore about your lake. And you know, we'll all, as we're not speaking, be looking at your answers, and we're kind of excited to hear who's here and what you're interested in. And I guess with that, I'll toss it over to Noah to give us kind of some ground rules for the Zoom meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Scott. It's great to see everybody on here. I think it looks like we've got 52 people on the call today, which is absolutely fantastic and exciting. So as folks are finding the chat button that Scott had just did, if you take your mouse and you go down to the bottom of your Zoom window, you're going to find a couple buttons down there. One of them is going to say chat. And there might come a couple times when we say, hey, please type something in the chat. And that's going to go to all of us that are here on the panel that you can see in front of us. The more important one for today's meeting is the Q&A button. And so if you look over to the right, you're going to see a Q&A button. And so that's where you guys can type in your questions. And so if you have questions, throughout the presentations today, it doesn't matter whenever you have them, go ahead and just type them into the Q&A button there, and that will go to a couple of moderators here, and we'll be able to see them. And so we might not be able to get to all of the questions, but we'll try to get to as many as we can. And we'll either answer them live, or if it's a more straightforward question, we might actually just type out an answer to it as the presentations are going along, just to stay efficient. And so somebody just typed in a question that we saw come through. But the point is watch that little Q&A button. And so every now and then you'll see a red number or something on it, and that will give you an indication that somebody's answered or asked a question that you guys could look at a response for. We've got the chat button that there's a bunch of great comments coming in from a whole bunch of different lakes that we'll be super excited to look through and interested to see what those are. And then there's the Q&A button for if you have any questions. And so I'm going to, so one question came in that we forgot to introduce Susan Knight. And so I am just going to type an answer so that you guys see what that looks like. And my answer is going to say that we will answer this live. And once I send it, you guys should see a notification pop up that there was a Q&A, and I'll let Scott do that introduction. If you have any issues with technology and asking questions, throw it into the chat, the little button that says chat, and we'll see that and be able to respond to you directly. I hope that makes sense. Scott?
Yeah, sure. And thanks, Susan, for that question. And I'm sorry, Susan, for missing you. So Susan Knight is an aquatic plant researcher that works at the Trout Lake Station. and former director of the station. So yeah, thanks for joining us, Susan. And Susan will help moderate some of our Q&A today and help with the discussion.
All right, so I think that I'm first on the docket today for presenting. And so I'll start, I'm gonna share my screen here and give you guys a brief introduction to Trout Lake Station. I will say that I'm following the chat as all you guys are posting in there. And it's great to see there's lots of Eurasian water milfoil concerns, shoreline development, excitement over fish sticks projects, and questions on how you get grants for some of these efforts. And I'm really hoping that through today's presentation, we're able to hit on those and give you a broader picture of some of the research and information that's available both from this crew, but really this is just the start of the conversation. So to get started, Trout Lake Station, some of you are familiar with, others may be less familiar with. We are part of the Center for Limnology, which is a broader group that's associated with UW Madison. We have the facility here in Boulder Junction, Wisconsin, which is over in Vilas County, and then another lab on the shores of Lake Mendota down in Madison called the Hassler Lab. As Jake alluded to, we've had about 100 years of limnology at Trout Lake Station. Some of the first sampling started in the area, and the dates are a little debated, but 1908, we see data start coming in from the region. And during that time, Dr. Edward Burge and Chauncey Juday were two of the leaders who collected data on over 500 regional lakes. They're shown here sitting in front of a team of scientists that worked on that collection. And I always think it's amazing to think about what the roads and access to these lakes would have looked like when these guys were traveling around in their trucks and developing new equipment to do the sampling in this region. As Jake said, they laid the foundation really for the science of limnology. We'll use the word limnology when we're talking about that. It's just the study of inland lakes and waters. And in addition to starting the study of lakes up in this area, they were foundational to establishing the University of Wisconsin Department of Zoology and the Center for Limnology itself. Officially, Trout Lake Station started on the north shore, shown in the map here with the light colored star, of the south basin of Trout Lake. And you can see a picture of the original cabins on that shoreline. These small cabins included lab facilities, and they were named appropriately based on what was going on in each building. So the names that they held then, fish, bacteriology, plankton, and chemistry, are names that have carried over into today, because these original buildings constructed in the 1920s were in the 1960s drug from the northern portion of the South Basin down to the South Shore across the ice. And on the South Shore, the UW Madison acquired a piece of property. It's about 77 acres, and those buildings still remain on site, and they house summer researchers each year. Over the years, research at Trout Lake Station has informed policies at regional, state, and national, even international levels. And I don't have time to go into too much detail, but one example of that was the Little Rock Lake project back in the 1980s that looked at the impacts of acid rain on lake systems. Observations both in northern Wisconsin and throughout the Adirondacks indicated that rain was more acidic than the lakes upon which it was falling. And the acid rain was becoming a high concern, especially for lakes that weren't able to absorb that acid into their system without changing. And so researchers decided to look at Little Rock Lake. And Little Rock Lake is kind of naturally divided into two basins. In 1983, they began a project to divide this lake into two parts. And in one basin, they added enough acid to bring the pH of that entire basin down to the equivalent acid rain deposition that was occurring. The acidification was over a few years, and what happened was that there was a large change in the algae, the zooplankton, and the fish communities within that basin. The chemistry and the physical aspects of that system changed as well. It was pretty drastic. Species were lost, and the food web structure really broke down. The other interesting part of that was they monitored the recovery, and while the chemical and physical properties of the treated basin recovered, they recovered much more quickly than the biology, which took many years to recover. This study is just one example. The researchers that were involved in the Little Rock project presented to national groups, the EPA, and even to Congress about the impacts of acid rain on lake systems, and really helped drive the formation of the Clean Water Act and emissions controls over the years. And like I said, this is just one example of some of the projects that have taken place at Trout Lake Station, but some of them have large scale and far-reaching impacts. Other projects that you could ask questions about or look into include studies into lake and fish mercury levels throughout the region. You'll hear some about invasive species today and aquatic plant management research that's taken place. We have a long-term data set on lake levels and agricultural practices phosphorus addition into local waterways and the impacts that that can have on lake systems. Another big part of what takes place at Trout Lake Station began in 1981. And while it's historic, it's also very modern to what takes place here in terms of research and some of the people that are employed here. So LTER stands for Long-Term Ecological Research Program. It's a National Science Foundation program that started in the 1980s, and it's established sites throughout the country where the goal is to collect continuous and long-term data. We were selected as a site in 1981 and have continued to collect those types of data, biological, physical, chemical, for 39 years on 5 different lakes throughout the region. You can see the map of the lakes, Trout Lake, Sparkling, Crystal, and 2 bogs throughout the region. And you'll hear a lot more about that from Noah Ladig, who is presenting right after me. In addition to LTR being on site, that established long-term data set has drawn in communities from the National Ecological Observatory Network and the Great Lakes Ecological Observatory Network. These groups strive to grab high frequency and high resolution data for systems throughout the world and share it so that we can make large scale inferences. Over the years, Trout Lake Station has grown. So building on those original 4 cabins, the facilities now have increased in size. We include a large laboratory, an office and conference facility. It's all in one building. And then we have 4 small outbuildings and 10 housing units. We're able to house up to 47 individuals. As part of the structure at Trout Lake Station, we're open year round, and we have 10 staff that are here working year round. 7 of those are researchers, and there's 4 of us on the call today. So me, Noah, Susan, and Carol all work out of Trout Lake Station. We also have Carl Watrous, a scientist who works on mercury and evaporation from lakes. And then 2 researchers on the LTR program, Pam Motz and Paul Schramm, who are technicians with that, in addition to 3 operation personnel. While our staff on site is about 10 each summer, we have most of our 47 beds full throughout the summer, with researchers, undergraduate students, graduate students coming and going on various projects throughout the summer. These students are drivers of some of the innovation that takes place And here's a picture you can see on one side, the 2019 summer, with the wealth of folks smiling on station. And then 2020 looked a lot different, with people smiling from the screen. But in general, it does house a lot of training and research for the students and folks that come through. In addition to the summer activity, we also in the fall have a number of courses that come through to use the station for weekend field trips, conferences by agencies. We welcome lake groups and lake associations to meet on station as long as it's related to water topics or conservation issues. And so it is possible to use the facility for gatherings. Of course, this year looks a lot different, but we're hoping that that will pick up again over time. I wanted to spend a little bit of time just highlighting current projects that are taking place on site. And these again are just a snapshot of things that are going on here and that we can expand on if there's questions. One thing that's really a hot topic throughout the area is lake levels, and pictured here in the red shirt is Dom Ceruzzi. Dom came to Trout Lake Station about 8 years ago wanting to study the effect of drought on lakes. And we laugh because since he's come, we've had some of the highest water levels and wettest summers around. But he's made the most of it and has created some really robust tools to look at the connection between trees and the groundwater and lake levels. And so his work continues, and that research is definitely active on station. Another project that's picking up and following up on some past research. Back in the 90s, there was a lake called Crystal Lake that was invaded by smelt. And we know that there are some lakes in Forest County that also are seeing some smelt. And the smelt came in, and basically when they came into the system in the 1990s, they wiped out the yellow perch in Crystal Lake. And so the smelt took over and reached extremely high abundances within the system. In the 2012, I think, is when they decided to warm the water column of Crystal Lake. They put in these big mixers and warmed the water column. And the warm temperatures did not allow the fish to spawn and survive in the system. And so the smelt numbers declined significantly with that treatment. The rainbow smelt, there is concern that they'll come back into the system. So one of Jake Vander Zanden and Greg Sass, who works with the Wisconsin DNR fisheries, one of their graduate students, Joe Mirnak, is looking at if we can replace the smelt with Cisco. They've been collecting preliminary information on the system and plan to add Cisco within the coming years to see if we can displace the remainder of smelt in that system. Holly Emke is a graduate student also with Jake Vander Zanden, who's working up in McDermott Lake in Iron County. And she's asking whether the removal of bass and sunfish will allow for increases in perch and walleye and other native fish populations. And so they've conducted 3-year removal of bass and sunfish and are monitoring all aspects of the lake from physical, chemical, and biological community to see what response the lake has and if that is a potential management strategy for increasing some of the game fishes. And of course, we can't leave out winter as the snow begins to fall. There's quite a few projects. One big project here illustrated where NOAA and Hillary Dugan are leading a team of graduate students to clear ice from a portion of a bog system. And they're looking at how snowpack influences ice formation and what's happening down below. The research on station, those again are just a few of the snapshots of the 40 or 50 folks coming through each summer on various projects. But I wanted to make sure to not leave it all at science and let folks know that there's other ways of engaging with the station. We have a strong artist in residence program. This artist in residence program brings in artists to work with scientists each year and highlights new storytelling form for some of the scientific findings and the people that are involved in the conservation of water, maybe in different ways and reaching new audiences. And so that is one way to engage with the station if the science isn't the path you choose, thinking about how you can integrate those. And another way to learn more about what's going on in the area is that we participate in hosting the Science on Tap event, which takes place the first Wednesday of each month. Our next one is coming up next week on the 4th and is wildlife in the region, and it'll be Tammy Ryan is presenting. So if you're interested, feel free to put your name in the chat to be on the SOT mailing list and we can get you added. So I think that's all I have. And I'm going to turn it over to Noah to jump in here on LTER.
Thanks, Gretchen. It looks like we've got some questions coming in that we'll get to, but it looks like folks are navigating that technological aspect of a Zoom webinar, which is great. All right, so I am going to talk a little bit about the LTR program that Gretchen started giving a pretty high level introduction to in her talk as well. And there's a few of us here on the call today that are extensively involved with that. Jake, Gretchen, and myself are all investigators on that program, and then Susan and Carol also work with a lot of different aspects of it as well. And so I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about lessons from the long view, long-term research in Wisconsin's lakes. And what I want to do and start off is that I want to use data as an example of why long-term research and collecting long-term data is so important for understanding the dynamics of our lake. And I'm going to use ice as an example. Many of us probably now are starting to think about our lakes freezing over and winter starting. I know the pond on our property has been frozen for the better part of a week, week and a half now. And so this is Lake Mendota from a few years ago on January 18th in 2016. Not much snow on it. It looks like it's relatively new ice. It would be very late for ice up in the perspective of up here. So what do we know about Lake Mendota in 2016? We know that the lake first froze on January 11th and the lake opened back up on March 13th. And so there was 62 days of ice on Lake Mendota in 2016. And so, you know, we start looking at that single data point that we have and thinking about from our own perspectives of, well, what does that make sense? What are the patterns that we see? How much does that tell us? You know, up here with our perceptions of the Northwoods, you know, thinking about a lake freezing in January 11th and opening back up in early March, you know, would be a perspective of, well, that's really, really short. But relative to Lake Mendota, what does one data point tell us? Well, really, it doesn't tell us that much. It doesn't give us that much perspective. But what about 15 years? So if we look at the long-term ice duration trend on Lake Mendota going from 2000 through 2015, you know, 15 years is, you know, 3 PhD cycles. If it takes 5 years on grants like that, the average grant that many of us get to do this type of research is on the 3 to 5 year grant or 3 to 5 year cycle. So we're talking, you know, 3 to 5 cycles of continuous grants to collect this type of data. And if we look at it, what, you know, what pattern ends up emerging from 15 years, which is really an incredible amount of, in terms of duration of things, you know, is ice duration getting longer? You know, it certainly looks like there's a potential increase in ice duration over that 15 years. You know, why is it? Is it because things are getting colder? Is it staying the same? 15 years is a long time. But if we place that 15-year record within even longer term records, we see an incredibly different picture emerge from that data. So the highlighted blue area on the right-hand side is that 15-year time period that I was showing you before, where if you just looked at the last 15 years, you might think that ice duration was increasing, when in reality, if we expand to the entire 130-year record, what we see is that we've lost over a month total in ice duration on Lake Mendota. And really what that emphasizes is the importance of placing your observations, whatever they might be about ecosystems, within the context of the long-term record. And that long-term records can really highlight trends that would not be obvious or we could not see without the presence of that type of data. And so ecosystems, and processes that happen are really difficult to study on scales from years to decades. And I think that that ice record really emphasizes and highlights that point, that a lot of things that happen in ecosystems really occur on timescales of years to decades to centuries. And ice is one of those classic examples that a lot of processes and change happen slowly over time, and there's a lot of variance in them. And so there's a lot of variability on year to year basis. And so we need a lot of data to understand what's going on in our ecosystems, how they're changing and why they're changing. And so ecology and really limnology needs long-term data. And John Magnuson, who was one of the founding researchers for the LTR program and for the North Temperate Lakes LTR program here in northern Wisconsin, said in the absence of long-term research, serious misjudgments can occur in attempts to manage the environment. And I think that that is very, very true and really emphasizes that point. So back in 1980, John Magnuson, along with some other researchers, really crystallized this idea that there wasn't a mechanism to fund long-term research, that long-term research was really important for understanding and perceiving change in ecosystems, be it lakes, be it terrestrials, forests, but there wasn't a mechanism to collect that type of data. As the ice record shows, it can take a really long time to get the necessary data to perceive and understand these patterns that are emerging. And so they went to the National Science Foundation and basically put in a preliminary proposal that laid out this framework. And what came out of it was the long-term research program. And this is back from the National Science Foundation in the 1980, talking about sort of what the purposes of a program like this is. And it's to capture phenomena at scales greater than 3 years, detect long-term trends and changes that may be underway, and provide a context for short-term work. And so that's the idea when I showed you earlier with the ice data. If you just had 15 years of data, it's really important to put that data within the context of the longer-term records. And so those are the big reasons for why we think about and why these types of programs that emphasize perceiving and understanding long-term change and collecting the data necessary to do that exist. And so we're part of the Long-Term Ecological Research Network that is across the entire United States. There are currently 30 sites, and you can see them on the lower right-hand corner if you can see my mouse. They range from the Arctic to the Antarctic, from the East Coast to the West Coast, and everywhere in between. We are the only site that's dedicated strictly to perceiving and understanding long-term change in lakes. There's sites that work in coastal environments, there's sites that work in deserts, there's sites that work in high alpine environments, terrestrials, prairies, so on and so forth, across the entire gradient of different biomes we see across the United States and beyond. Here we have 2 sites. We've got a site in northern Wisconsin, and that's in the Trout Lake region. You can see the star up there. And then we've got a site in the Yahara Lakes watershed, which is down in Madison, around the UW Madison campus. And really, those 2 sites focus on different landscapes that they exist in. Here in northern Wisconsin, we're very much of a forested lake dominated rich landscape, where southern Wisconsin, those lakes are situated in an urban and agricultural region. And so that allows us not only to understand how lakes are behaving and operating and changing in these 2 very different environments, but also think about what the drivers are and differences between these regions and how they may operate in these very different regions. So the North Temperate Lakes basic overarching research question is to focus on how climate, social ecological interactions, land use and cover, ecological processes act in concert to shape past, present, future of lakes and lake districts. It basically fills in under that question that I said of our goal is to perceive and understand what those long-term changes are. So we've got basically 4 different primary areas that our research focuses on. The most critical aspect is the long-term research that Gretchen hinted at, where we are collecting data year-round from 7 lakes here in northern Wisconsin and 4 lakes in southern Wisconsin. We add some historic data into it. And people often ask me, what do you collect? And basically, if you can imagine it, we probably collect it. We collect a wide range of physical, chemical, biological, and social variables. We combine that with comparative studies. And so those might be regional studies where we extend beyond the lakes that are our primary focus and include other lakes and systems as well. We also do a fair amount of modeling work as well as whole ecosystem experiments. And Gretchen touched briefly on a couple of those with the lake acidification in Little Rock Lake and the experiments to remove rainbow smelt from Crystal Lake, along with a suite of other ones as well. And so those are the 4 sort of pillars of the types of research that we're involved in. Just to continue highlighting some of those different types of research we're involved in, as quick smattering of some of the research that we've been done. Here on the upper left, we do an extensive amount of work with invasive species, both here in northern Wisconsin as well as in southern Wisconsin. And the top left panel here, you can see, forward, my mouse did it. You can see an example of the work we've done looking at the impacts of rusty crayfish as they invade into lakes. And you can see the increasing trend of rusty crayfish. This is data from Trout Lake combined with the declining macrophytes that we end up seeing in the littoral zone. We've also spent a fair amount of time looking at the role of development. And so this is the middle panel here on the left-hand side. The role of development and that's implications. And so, many of us here live in the Northwoods because we want to be in and around the amazing lakes that dominate our landscape. But one of the consequences is we tend to tidy up lakes. And so as housing development increases along lakes, what we end up seeing is that we have less coarse woody habitat. So those downed trees that fall into lakes and might be near our docks or in front of the areas where we want our kids or grandkids to swim, tend to remove them and cleaning them up. But that has big implications for things like fish growth and fish growth rates. And so we've worked on those types of issues. The bottom plot is an example of the long-term ice records that we work on collecting. And so thinking about changing climate and its implications for lakes, loss of ice is just one of those implications. But you can see some examples of the records on the bottom. The really long one is from Lake Mendota. And then the 2 top ones, which very much mimic the patterns we're seeing in Lake Mendota, but here from northern Wisconsin, are from Sparkling Lake and Escanaba Lake. We also, as I talked briefly about thinking about expanding just beyond our core lakes, here in northern Wisconsin, in the upper right, you can see basically a GIS map of the region up here, including Forest County over on the eastern side of the map. And the gray is wetlands and the lakes are in black. And what you can see is we are a aquatic dominated landscape. Over 40% of our landscape is either lakes and or wetlands. And if you look at it, you can very clearly draw the outlines of the Northern Highlands Lake District, really dense area of lakes. I believe there's over 7,500 lakes in this region if you add them all up. And so much of our work extends beyond just Trout Lake and the lake, my mouse keeps going, the lake that we focus on around here, and thinking about placing those long-term patterns and research that we see in these study lakes and understanding how they extend to the broader region as a whole. And so, for example, my PhD work, I worked actually some in Forest County. I did a bunch of stuff at the regional scale, and there's a lot of us that think and work at those scales. And then down at the bottom, another area that we focus on and thinking about is how can we build and leverage technology to better understand spatial variations within lakes. And so instead of just thinking about going out and collecting, a Secchi disc reading or some water quality reading from the deep hole in the lake, which is sort of classically the types of data we collect, what types of technology can we build to better understand the spatial variability of water quality in lakes? And so the bottom map shows a photo of chlorophyll blooms in Lake Mendota. And then in the upper right, you can see the evolution of equipment that we've built that we can mount on the back of boats and drive around, on plane at 20 to 30 miles an hour and quickly go and sample an entire lake to get and characterize the water quality across the entire lake instead of just at a single point in time. So leveraging technology, as technology becomes more accessible, leveraging technology to better understand the dynamics of these lake ecosystems that we care so much about. So what are our major research themes? We think a lot about long-term regional ecology of lakes and their surrounding landscapes, aquatic invasive species, their effects and the consequences of their removal, microbial ecology of lakes, mercury biogeochemistry of lakes, regional carbon dynamics, groundwater surface water interactions, lake metabolism, which falls into sort of the technology sides of things and buoys, and then socioeconomic aspects of lakes and people's interactions with lakes. We treat lakes as social ecological systems. We cannot think about lakes without also simultaneously thinking about the people that live and interact on them. And with that is what I've got. So thank you. And I see a bunch of questions come in and we'll have an opportunity to talk about those briefly.
Yeah, so Greg Matzke's coming in next and we're gonna just keep carrying over. I know we're running a little long, but Greg, go ahead and share what you want and we'll make sure we have time for questions when you finish.
All right, perfect. I'm gonna share my screen right now. All right, hopefully everyone can see it. All right, so my name is Greg Matzke. I'm the fisheries biologist that covers Florence and Forest County for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. And I just wanted to do a quick intro to fish management. And really, I love talking about fish. I think you have to if you're in the profession that I'm in. I'll probably go a little long here, but I will be monitoring that Q&A chat on the bottom. So if you click the Q&A chat and want to submit a fish question, when I'm done with this, I'll be sure to monitor that and try to answer as many questions as I can. But I do kind of want to start from the ground level because I don't know, how much all of you know about fish management. So it's just going to be a quick run through. I'm going to go pretty fast. I'm sorry about that, but I know it'll be recorded. And any questions that you have, just jot them into that Q&A and I'll do my best to monitor that. So this is the lake edition. So we also do a lot of stream and river type stuff, but this is just a real quick 15-minute rundown on what we do with fish management. So first I'm going to start talking about the data collection that we do, the different management tools that we use, and then hopefully we'll have enough time for me to run through real quick, and I won't be able to get into a ton of details, but a local example from Forest County. And the main thing is that our mission in fish management is to make fishing better. So keep that in mind, and I want to talk about the tools that we use to do that and how we do our job. So as far as data collection goes on lakes, we have two primary gears that we typically use to get our data. So this is an electrofishing boat. This is what we use typically to sample nesting species. And also we use it constantly in a lot of different portions of our surveys. So basically how this works is we have a boat like I have here. Off of these two yellow booms that stick out off the front of the boat, electrodes dangle into the water, and that's the negative charge, and the boat hull is the positive charge. So it creates a current of energy similar to what I have on the screen right now. And basically in between the booms, it'll stun those fish momentarily, where our people standing on the front of the boat will dip those fish out, place that fish in a recovery tank, and they'll pop back to being pretty much normal within 10 to 30 seconds normally. And that yellow area around there, they get kind of stunned, but not always. And So it's tougher to get our sample from fish outside of there. But a lot of people think, you know, I get questions all the time, like, when are you going to electrofish our lake? And they think that I'm, you know, canoeing out there and I'm taking a positive charge and a negative charge and I'm shocking the whole lake and going around and scooping things up. That's not how it goes. This boat is moving forward. The electricity only goes down to about a, you know, 4 to 6 foot range. So we target these surveys when certain species are near shore. And so this is just kind of a diagram of a lake. We take this boat along the shoreline. When fish are near shore for different periods of their life, we're using this boat to go up and collect fish. Our second most used gear in our lakes is a pike net. And so you can see at the front of that boat, you can see kind of a net with some hoops kind of sticking out of the water. That's the main frame of the net. That's where the fish will actually get trapped and where they will be held. And then you can see a series of floats that are lining up to the shoreline. That's basically a fence. On the top, there's floats. On the bottom, there's leads. It'll stop when fish swim along the shoreline. They'll run into that fence. They can decide to go toward shore or out to deeper water. When they turn toward deeper water, they get trapped in the net. So this is how that works. Basically, there's our shoreline. And when we set it, you can see the red line is that mock fence that's set up. And then we got our trap net down below. And when fish are near shore, and we call these broadcast spawners, the ones that don't make nests, you know, electrofishing is very good for those that are nesting fish. Pike nets are really good for people that are for species that are broadcast spawners. So in this picture, you can see walleyes. They're getting ready to spawn. They're moving up onto gravel shoals. What they'll do is they'll swim along the shoreline on that spawning grounds, waiting to spawn. And so those fish, as they move along the shoreline, run into that lead and they move toward that trap end of the net. We come along and lift that end of the net and we can gather our fish to get our data from. And inside the net, this picture shows, you know, we were muskie netting a few muskies that are caught in a net. And then when we have those fish in our possession, in our tubs in the boat, we're able to take a lot of different data from them. And what we try to do is we try to estimate abundance of adult fish. We also try to estimate abundance of juvenile fish so we can tell how natural recruitment is going. We take structures from the fish so we can tell how old they are, and with that we can infer growth rates to see if these fish in this lake of that species are growing above, below average, or right at average. We also measure all the fish so we get size structures so we can see what those populations look like, and we weigh fish to get a kind of an overall look at the overall health of that species. And so in any one event, we get a snapshot. And basically these snapshots over time, once we line them up and repeat these surveys year in, year out, which normally we have our lakes on different rotations. Some are on 4-year rotations, 8-year, 12-year rotations. But basically we revisit and we redo these surveys on these lakes every few years. And that allows us to put a time series together. So kind of like Noah was showing with that long-term data and why it's important. That's the same thing that's important with fisheries. Now, our data doesn't go back quite as far, so we're not dealing with quite as long, but basically we take all these snapshots and we try to get an understanding of what's going on in the lake as far as the fishery goes. So once we have this data, you know, we want to make our decisions based on the data. And what can we do? We have this data. What can we do to our lakes to try to improve our fisheries? And so there's 3 basic tools of fish management. And tool number 1 is fish. We can basically add fish. And here's a picture of a few different stocking events. On the lower right, we got a bunch of lake trout going into Lake Lucerne. Lower left, we have some muskies being stocked. And then we have our fall fingerling walleyes being stocked in the upper left. So everyone's pretty familiar with stocking and the addition of fish. But we also do, you know, fish removals when they reach nuisance levels or there's certain species that are impacting the species that we manage that specific lake for. And so there's also fish subtraction. Second tool is habitat. Typically, we're trying to enhance habitat for the species that we want to manage that lake for. In some situations, we're also trying to reduce habitat for species that we don't want in that population. But this is a picture of a fish stick project where we did over probably about a mile of shoreline and on a flowage that was drawn down. And as you can see, this was bare shore beforehand, and this is just a small segment. It wraps for almost a mile after that. But here we're adding large woody debris to a lake. And here's another large walleye reef that was installed in March of 2019. This is on Crane Lake. The Lake District, the Mole Lake Tribe, Wisconsin DNR all got together and were able to install a pretty massive rock reef to help walleye spawning. The third tool and the last tool in the toolbox really is people. And this is probably one of the hardest ones to manage. And so when I mean by managing people, we're trying to manage the actions of those people that are utilizing the fishery. And so typically we're talking about regulations. And on the left, you can see a special panfish regulation. This is on Wabakan and Riley Lakes in Forest County, where we're reducing the bag limit of panfish. We're basically restricting harvest. And on the right, there's a sign from Jungle Lake where we're basically liberalizing the harvest on largemouth bass. On Wabakan and Riley, we have great growth rates. It's a thriving pan fishery, but we're not seeing those top end fish. And so we know that human impacts are stopping them from reaching their potential. So we're limiting the harvest of panfish. On Jungle Lake, that's part of one of our projects that we got going on with the Mole Lake Tribe and their lake association. And out there, largemouth bass are kind of standing in our way of trying to maintain a very high quality walleye population. So here we're liberalizing it. We're allowing anglers to take more fish because we want those fish to be at more normal levels instead of overabundant. So those are the three main tools. Now I'm going to get into a local example, and this is a new one of kind of how we tie everything together. And again, I'm very low on the specifics here. This is just a real fast run through. So if there's questions, I'll definitely try to answer them. But here's an example, Roberts Lake. This lake, ever since we introduced muskies and walleyes in 1938, this lake's basically managed for perch, walleye, and muskie. And smallmouth bass have been present and kind of a thriving species, and they play well with that group of fishes. So basically, I would add smallmouth into there as well. But here's kind of looking at the long-term data and how we collect our data, and we repeat our surveys over time and what we can gain from it. And so here's the problem that I saw after we did a 2-year survey in 2016, 2017 to see what's going on with the lake. And as you can see, there's a trend of decreased adult walleye abundance in Roberts Lake, going back to the first walleye population estimate in 1987. So over time, and you can see it drops off pretty sharply. In 2010, we had some successful stocking events that kind of propped that up for a little while, but we reached an all-time low as far as walleye abundance. So why is that going on? Well, it's going on because they're no longer naturally reproducing, or they're not reproducing at levels that we need to. So on the y-axis there, you can see how we measure natural reproduction of walleyes. So basically the number of age 0 walleyes that we capture during electrofishing per mile. Basically anything over about 20 per mile is going to give you a year class. And we only need to have that happen about once every 5 years, but we really need it to happen that frequently. And our best walleye waters will eclipse that 20 per mile, probably 3 out of 5 years. So if you look at this time series breakdown here, you can see that there's 3 distinct time periods. At least in my mind, I see 3 distinct time periods. From 1975 to 1992, we had over 40 age 0 walleyes per mile as an average. So this was what we would consider a walleye factory. Then once we get into the late 90s, and please remember the late 90s. Something goes on in the late 90s, and that's kind of what this whole presentation is going on. By the late 90s, things kind of stop, and we're still getting walleye reproduction. We're finding age 0 walleyes during our surveys, but it's an insignificant level. It's not enough to produce a year class, but the habitat's still there. There's still fish being naturally reproduced. Move into the more recent decade or so, and there's basically no natural reproduction. 3 or 4 different age 0 walleyes handled throughout all those surveys. So that's the problem and why the adult walleye population is declining. There's also other problems going on. So again, we look at that time series data. Here's perch abundance. So how we track perch abundance with our adult perch assessments in the spring. And you can see, you know, the y-axis has a pretty large scale here. So I'm going to remove that outlier there. And this was one of the best perch populations in northern Wisconsin, and you know, for Forest County, it was a perch factory. And you can see right around the late 90s there, all of a sudden, where'd all the perch go? Muskies too. Remember, we've been managing this for perch, walleyes, and muskies. And this was a very strong, naturally reproducing muskie population. And if you look at our adult estimates, so that's the number of adult muskies per acre in Roberts Lake, we have that declining over that same time period. And again, the late 90s is kind of that pivot point. And when we look at muskie reproduction, natural reproduction, you can see basically muskie reproduction stopped in 1998. There's been no naturally reproduced muskies found since 1998. And again, so we're looking at problems with the perch populations is disappearing, the walleye population is no longer naturally reproducing, the muskie population is not naturally reproducing. We've been working on this system for 70 or 80 years to provide a perch, walleye, muskie fishery. Well, what's going on with the other species? Well, the ones we're trying to manage for are all doing poorly. Let's look, and you can see during the whole time when perch, walleye, and muskie were thriving, northern pike abundance was very, very low. And remember that walleye and muskie were introduced in 1938. So by the time they became adults, we're looking at just past that 1942 area. They basically kept that population humming, or that fishery humming as a perch, walleye, muskie factory. And then around 1999, we see this kind of creeping back up to where northern pike started to become extremely abundant. In fact, when you look at our data, or my data for the region, from between 2011 and 2017, the highest abundance pike population in Forest and Florence counties. You look at the other species, the smallmouth and largemouth. When you look from 1999 to present, and again, going all the way back to the first surveys in the 40s, smallmouth bass were present, largemouth were very, very rare. Around 1999, the black bar is largemouth, the white bar is smallmouth. From 1999 to my 2016 survey, we had an increase in largemouth abundance by 19-fold and an increase in smallmouth bass by 2-fold. Smallmouth bass, they're a great partner for perch, walleye, and muskie, so they're welcomed. Largemouth bass, you know, the theory is that they're not quite as good of a partner. And so when we look at largemouth bass abundance in the two counties, Roberts Lake is the highest density largemouth bass population of all lakes over 100 acres. So in 2016, 2017, this is what the game fish population looked at. We had 20 adult game fish per acre in this lake, and the ones that we're managing for, muskies and walleyes, are both at all-time lows. They're a tiny sliver of this pie. So what did we do? We put together a biomanipulation project where we're going to try to flip the system back to what it used to be and what we're trying to manage it for. So that involved the removal of adult northern pike, the removal of largemouth bass, and we're also removing age 0 bluegills, the ones that are hatched that year, to try to give perch the upper hand and try to bring back this perch walleye population. And so we look back at our three tools in the toolbox. As far as the fish portion goes, we're removing northern pike, we're removing largemouth bass. We're now aggressively stocking the Lake Michigan genetic strain of walleyes at 15 per acre. The Lake Association is stocking in the years that the state is not, so we're jump starting that population. And then muskie stocking was resumed in 2011 at a very low rate to maintain the population. As far as habitat goes, we're operating under the assumption that habitat is not limiting. And if this fails, you know, we may end up having to look at habitat a little more, but right now the habitat looks pretty good for both perch and walleye. So we'll see how everything else goes. As far as managing the people, we removed the size limit on largemouth bass. So we're going to allow more harvest of largemouth bass to keep this population where we want it. And northern pike already has a very liberal regulation. So the main goals are to turn this lake that had been since the start of our management a great perch, walleye, muskie, and smallmouth lake. We're trying to bring that back because right now it's turned into a very abundant bluegill, extremely abundant largemouth bass, and extremely abundant northern pike population, with natural reproduction of the fish that we're trying to manage for basically gone. And so our goal of this fishery in the future is, again, we looked at it before, there was 20 adult game fish per acre, and walleyes and muskies accounted for almost nothing. We're trying to bring the largemouth bass population down to 1.5 adults per acre. We're trying to bring the northern pike population down to 3 adults per acre. And we're going to allow the smallmouth bass population to expand and fill the role that they've always had. And we're going to hopefully bring back natural reproduction of walleyes, but at a minimum, get some good stocked walleye survival and increase that abundance. And hopefully we'll be able to maintain a solid muskie population throughout this whole thing. And so I don't think we're not doing questions right now. Or actually we are. It's coming up on a question session. But if you have any questions, if you don't want to, you can type them into the chat and that'll be fine.
All right, Greg. Well, thank you. It's really great to hear this smorgasbord of lake-related information. We've already heard quite a wide range of topics here. We're running behind schedule already, not surprisingly. So what I'll do is we'll honor this Q&A section, and I will give one question. Greg said that he would be able to answer a lot of these on the chat. So let's see. There's a lot of questions. Some of the ones that I was looking at have already been answered too. Okay, for Noah, how does the acceleration of global warming seem to affect this pattern in ice duration?
Yeah, that's
do you have something to say to that?
I do. That's a great question. I think is Jake mentioned, there's been a bunch of that have been answered just in text response. So if you click on your Q&A buttons, you'll be able to see those that are answered as well. Yeah, so there's two things that are going on, and a group of colleagues of mine have been working on this recently, including Gretchen, with thinking about recent changes in ice duration, the impacts of global warming and climate change on that. And so one thing that we're seeing is that there's this strong directional trend, and though it showed up in the patterns that I showed in those graphs where we were seeing this long-term trend in loss of lake ice. The other thing that's really interesting is we're seeing a huge increase in variance in year to year. And so that's sort of a phenomena that is emerged over about the last decade. And so like ice out, for example, over the last, for the periods of records we had, the average variation from year to year was something like 8 days. So on average, ice would go out 8 days different from year to year. In the last decade or a little bit more, it's closer, is it 12 or 20 days? Gretchen, I can't remember which one it is. It's a huge increase in variance. And so we've all experienced that. We've seen these polar vortexes come in, these whiplash weather events that seem to be happening much more frequently. And those are a consequence of changing global climate patterns and weather patterns as a result of climate change. And so climate change is imparting this directional trend. It's also imparting a lot of variance into the patterns we're seeing as well.
Can I just follow up, because there's two more questions in the chat about fish dynamics in response to climate change, and Noah just hit on this. I think it went from 7-year variation back in the 80s to 20 or 7-day change versus 21 now. And so we've recently worked on a walleye spawning data set with Greg Sass and Zach Feiner. And it's amazing the variability that we see in ice off from year to year is mapped very, very closely by walleye spawning and the timing of walleye spawning. And what we see is that average ice years have a lot better success when we look at walleye over time. And so that's those are great questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Gretchen and Noah. And there are some more questions in there. And I think Greg said he would sort of chip away at and answer those sort of as we go. And so a bunch of the questions that I'm seeing here are for Greg. So here now, will everyone, if you could take 30 seconds and just stretch a little bit. We don't want to have you just sitting at your screen for 2 hours straight. So take a second and I'll introduce Carol Warden, who is our next speaker. She is joint between Trout Lake Station and the Wisconsin DNR, and she is going to bring us more into the realm of lake management and talk about aquatic plant management in the region and some of the options, including prevention, for how we address aquatic invasive species and aquatic plants. So I will pass the baton off to Carol.
Great, thanks, Jake. Thumbs up if you can hear me, or I think I'm on. All right. All right, thanks. And I'm just going to go through a few of the aquatic invasive species that we see in the region and some of the management efforts that we have going on with each one in a general sense. So one of the common invasive species we see throughout this region is Eurasian water milfoil, many of which you are familiar with. Some of the lakes in Forest County are on this call that have this plant present in their lake. I believe Forest County has approximately 9 lakes with Eurasian water milfoil present. And with the picture here on the right, you can see what that plant looks like. We do have a few native milfoils to Wisconsin also. This is the only invasive one, non-native one. And the way you can tell this from its cousins is to count these leaflets on either side of the leaf. So you can see each node of leaves has 4 leaves coming off, and they have these very feathery leaflets on each side. And if you can count more than 12, about 12 to 20 leaflets on each side of that leaf, chances are you're working with Eurasian water milfoil. Here is the extent of that plant throughout Wisconsin and the US. So as you can see on the US map, pretty much all of the Great Lakes area is covered in this plant. There's a few philosophies on how it may have gotten here through aquarium trade or just through trade in general from Europe and Asia over and then into our aquatic systems from there. And in Wisconsin, the latest maps I have are a couple years old, but still gives a really good indication of where this species exists throughout the landscape. And you can see some of those green dots there in Forest County in Wisconsin. Some of the methods that we use for controlling Eurasian water milfoil include mechanical, chemical, biological, and prevention. And I'll actually start from the bottom up here because prevention is one that you will actually see for all of the invasive species that we deal with and talk about. And that's a really key one. That's where your Clean Boats, Clean Waters programs come in. That's where education comes in. That's where lake groups and meetings, filling people in on how these things move around. All of that plays a role in that prevention. And up north, we have an abundance of lakes, many of which don't have an invasive species present. So that prevention is still really key here in the northern region of Wisconsin. Other methods here, mechanical is where one might take a harvester or actually pull by hand. On the bottom right here, you'll see what one of those plant harvesters looks like in the lake, sort of like an aquatic lawnmower, if you will. And it has blades underneath the water surface. You can cut it off, bring those plants up to the top of the barge, and remove that biomass from the lake. This is actually a picture on the upper right of me and a former colleague, Kyle McLaughlin. And this was when we were first working on Silver Lake in Forest County. When that population of milfoil was very first found, we headed out one late September, early October, maybe, when was that, 2011, maybe 2010, and did our best efforts to pull that species from the boat launch right there on Silver Lake. Another method that we use with some plants that is in the toolbox for management is chemical herbicide treatments. And this is reserved for times when the plant is very abundant and clearly causing recreational or ecological impacts on the lake. And then we have biological methods too, which include, for this plant, this little milfoil weevil. And we have had colleagues throughout the state attempt control with this weevil. It's fairly labor intensive to grow that population of weevils and then see success in suppression of the plant matter that's out there. Some of our colleagues in the central region of the state have had better luck, maybe possibly because there's a longer growing season there. But that is an option that some of our northern lakes have been taken up recently too. So we'll see how that goes in a few years' time. All right, another fairly well-known species around the northern parts is curly-leaf pondweed. And here on the right, you can see what that species looks like. The leaves on curly-leaf pondweed are serrated and they're very squiggly. To me, they look like little tiny pieces of lasagna noodles coming off the stem. And if you feel them with your fingers, you can feel sort of that crunchy serration to the leaf also. So that's what gives this plant away compared to some of its native relatives like clasping leaf pondweed, where it might still have some of the wiggles, but it doesn't have that serrated leaf to it as well. And you can see the same pattern throughout the US as you saw with Eurasian water milfoil, sort of that path from east to west into all the areas that are lake rich. And we have a pretty, and the way this map is laid out is that it's by watershed with the US map. So we have a pretty full coverage of areas where we see Eurasian water milfoil throughout our, curly leaf pondweed throughout our landscape in Wisconsin. And on the right, you see the map from 2018. That's over 700 bodies of water in Wisconsin are known to have curly leaf pondweed. And you can see here that also includes a lot of riverine systems. This plant seems to do really well in a little bit of flowing water. So that's often times where we see it really pop up, is in just a bit of flow. And for the control methods, it's really similar to Eurasian water milfoil. Maybe not surprising, they're both aquatic plants, though they do have different ways of reproducing and places where they like to be. Some of the control methods are very similar. We can use, or one of the tools in the toolbox is chemical herbicide that is used for when reserved again for when we see more intense stands of this plant. The mechanical removal, again, can be by hand or with DASH, which I didn't mention through Eurasian water milfoil. DASH is diver-assisted suction harvesting. And people can go out in their dive suits and collect the plants and send the plants up that they collect into a tube vacuum, and they can remove the vegetation that way. And again, a very important one is prevention. Making sure our boats are cleaned off, that our props are cleaned off from vegetation, and that we're not moving these things around. We have very good evidence that people are the vectors for these, for invasive species moving around. A lot of what we know in terms of management is based on statewide research that we've done both at UW and with DNR. Showing how these plants move around and what affects their growth cycles. So humans are indeed the #1 vector for moving these things from lake to lake. All right, and the last one I'm going to touch on today is rusty crayfish. Here's a picture of one. You can see that dark red rusty stain, I guess you could say, on the side of its body, and that is a giveaway that it is a rusty crayfish compared to some of the native crayfish that we see don't have that very distinct red rusty spot on the side of their body. And rusty crayfish are prolific reproducers. They can produce, they can have up to more than 500 brood at a time. So they can really populate a lake if they are introduced. And this is the extent we see. And unlike some of the plants and other invasive species we see in our lakes here, this one didn't have the transcontinental travel that some of the others did. You can see the tan, the like yellowish tan spot on this map of the US, that's the Ohio River Basin. And that's where rusty crayfish first came, probably brought up to be used as bait and forage, planted in lakes intentionally to be forage for some of our more popular game fish species. And we realized that that was probably a mistake because they pushed out a lot of our native species and also cut down a lot of our native vegetation. So it doesn't necessarily have to come from the other side of the world for it to be a new introduction into a lake. And on the right here, we see the rusty crayfish distribution in Wisconsin. And again, they really do well in those river systems too. So you see all these long squiggly lines that cover rivers and lakes where we see rusty crayfish. All right, control methods here. Again, mechanical, but this is a little different. Instead of using a plant harvester or that diver assisted suction harvesting, we can set out traps like you see in the upper right here. That they're basically a modified minnow trap that we can set out and bait and collect rusty crayfish that way. We can also set up sort of exclosures underwater where we can put up sheeting to try and keep them out, bait the ones that are in there, and then use it as an experimentation plot to see what happens when crayfish are not present, or to see how it rebounds, I should say. Biological methods could include introducing predators, like you see here with the smallmouth bass. When we dive in Trout Lake, actually, sometimes we can catch these little critters by hand. And if the smallmouth bass are swimming around us, we can sort of release one and see nature at its finest, I suppose. And then possibly another biological method is your, cookout. You can boil these babies up, and they're a bit more work than your regular size lobster, but just as tasty if you're into that thing. And once again, prevention. We've talked about the education and how talking with lake groups and lake groups talking with their lake groups and UW Extension being involved in all the educational factors that we have in place to talk about not moving things from lake to lake is really important for all these things, not moving around. We also have laws in Wisconsin that say you can't move things from lake to lake. So laws and education, but probably more so the education is really what's going to aid in prevention. And then finally, I just wanted to touch on the value of aquatic plants also, because some of these invasive species definitely do change your lake. I appreciate that people do see those changes happening while they are living on the lake. But plants do indeed have a lot of value in our lakes as well, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. They provide oxygen, dissolved oxygen, while they photosynthesize to everything else that lives in the lake. All the fish, all the bugs, all the other critters rely on oxygen to survive, and plants provide that for them. It's habitat. Any fisher people out there that are out on their lake, you go to the plants for some of those fish that you want, because that's where they're going to be hanging out for protection and habitat. It can provide food for some critters in the lake, whether it's for the crayfish or maybe even some mammals that are using some of the lake. Shoreline protection is a big one, and Patrick will probably talk about that too, the importance of plants on a shoreline and how that reduces erosion, it reduces action, and it protects your shoreline from erosion. And then, as this picture indicates, I think anyway, they really provide some aesthetic beauty to our lakes. When Susan and I go out to sample for different plants around the region, some of these areas we get into are just so lovely. And I think I really hope that is as appreciated as all of these really functional things that plants provide too, that they can really be a palette for us to appreciate the aesthetic beauty of the Northwoods. So I will leave it at that. And hopefully we're not quite catching up on time, but not any worse for wear anyway. Let's see. Am I
Thanks,
still sharing
Carol.
the screen?
Yeah, I think we're moving to, we've got Patrick Goggin up next.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to be with you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So I'm tasked with talking a little about shoreline habitat and a relatively new wrinkle to the DNR grant program. It's been around 5 years, a Healthy Lakes and Rivers program that has 5 simple best practices to help promote clean water and wildlife habitat, 2 big goals that we have in our lake and river systems. You know, a lot of us, when we first showed up here in the North Woods, this might have been the scenario we came to, a small cabin next to a lake or a river where some of us slept inside, most of us maybe outside, and we didn't have much impact on the health of the lake with a structure and a footprint like this along the shore. Fast forward to the last 50 years, where with more affluence and just a love for lakes, people have changed these structures from 3-season cabins into more of a structure like this, a 4-season structure, having hard surfaces like this rooftop, maybe a driveway with a blacktop behind it, impacts to the vegetation in front of the shoreline. And you see that when we move from a lot that has vegetation, or even our small cabin that had a little sediment impact, when we get to this kind of development, and if we're not controlling the stormwater and maintaining the vegetation along the shore, we get this kind of impact. 5 times as much runoff, a big pulse of phosphorus. Why do we care about phosphorus? Well, that often is the limiting factor for algal growth in the lake. And then that sediment. We've been talking about fisheries and our love for them. Well, sediment is a challenge for the health of fisheries. It covers up that walleye habitat. It can suffocate those areas where egg laying might happen, and just in general cause problems for lake health. Conversely, when our lake or river land and water interface looks more like this, where we have 3 tiers of vegetation, a canopy, a mid layer, and a ground layer, we have, and then also woody structure. We've heard how important this wood that falls into lakes over time is, whether it's stumps like this or sunken wood down into the water. That's habitat for those aquatic insects. You know, as much as 40% of the diet of some fish is going to be from the insects falling off this vegetation into the water. The deep roots of this vegetation hold the soil. So we get all these benefits from this healthy wetland and woodland habitat around lakes and rivers. It performs the functions of mitigating floodwater. It helps with those deep roots to control that wave action pounding the shore, or even the ice action that we get. It helps with clean water because it intercepts that dirt and that runoff that we just talked about that comes off from those bigger lots. So if we maintain this nearshore buffer area and the aquatic plants and wood in the nearshore area, we're going to have a system along our shoreline that helps to deal with some of that dirt and pollutants instead of it getting to the lake. It also provides shade and cover for aquatic life. This is important because it can bring water temps down to reduce those algal blooms, or just provide space for critters to thrive. It also is ecological corridors, you know, critters using this space along the land-water interface for moving around the landscape. Songbirds, or in our part of the world here, Forest County, how cool is it when a moose comes down to Butternut Lake or one of our Forest County lakes and says hello? Well, if that habitat isn't there for that moose along those lakeshore areas, it's not going to make that trip. So we're going to lose that summer visitor. And then scenic beauty. Carol mentioned these aquatic plants and the upland plants along the shore. They provide functions and places where we can take refuge during things like COVID. And so with Healthy Lakes and Rivers, we've really tried to take some of the research from Trout Lake Station and other partners across the state over the last years and integrate it into the grant program to offer easy opportunities for people to do a best practice along their shore or up in the upland of their property that helps to improve or protect the health of lakes and rivers around the state. And it's a holistic approach. We're dealing with the upland area, a transition zone, that buffer area at the land-water interface, and also being stewards to that in-lake zone that we've talked about that's so important. The Healthy Lakes isn't necessary for everyone. Some projects get a little beyond the scale of what Healthy Lakes can manage. So we have some tools on the website, the Healthy Lakes and Rivers website, like this managing runoff guide that walks you through whether your site might be appropriate. But scenarios, there's some scenarios out there that are too large for Healthy Lakes, and we'll talk about avenues for them later with land and water departments or other partners. Supporting technical materials. So part of what we've done with the suite of materials to support the 5 best practices is we have a fact sheet and a technical guide for each one of the best practices. And what we do is we try to lay out for you in the fact sheet the cost, the materials, the how-to in terms of going about your best practice project. We also lay out in the guideline details around some of the technical aspects of the project. And then there's also a fact sheet that reviews the funding and administration process to the grant and answers some of those questions to help you get going with your Healthy Lakes or Rivers project. The 5 Healthy Lakes best practices start in the water with fish sticks, 3 to 5 big pieces of wood placed into the water. Next up, number 2 is at the land-water interface, doing native plantings at the scale of 350 square feet. And then these upland practices that help us deal with the hard surfaces, those impervious surfaces that are shedding that dirty water, that are shedding that sediment, that are bringing that phosphorus, if left unchecked, to the lake. And so number 3 is a water bar. This is, instead of letting that water come down the lake access road, let's divert it into the woods where it can safely infiltrate. Number 4 is, if we don't have a safe place to infiltrate it, we can use a rock infiltration area to send that water to and infiltrate that dirt and pollutants that way. And likewise, a rain garden is another tool in the toolbox. We get the ability to divert water to a rain garden for infiltration, and at the same time, have the ability to provide wildlife habitat through the native plantings. And way the rubber hits the road here is you see Scott pictured and me pictured here with some of our champions that we're visiting during a Healthy Lakes and Rivers site visit. And really it's at the local level. And I know some of you are on the phone here today. We partner with you at the local level and a local champion who helps connect people to the ideas of what's available from a Healthy Lakes and Rivers point of view. Talk through those fact sheets and helping them connect to the materials that go into either doing it yourself or jumping into the grant program and working with us to that end. We like to see people who've never done a Healthy Lakes or River project contact Scott early on and try to have a discussion just to make sure they're connecting to the resources and things they need to do good projects. And November 1st is when the grants come around each year. So you can imagine right now the inboxes are filling up with grant offerings. So I'm just going to quickly go through the best practices here. Here's fish sticks. This work is often done out on the ice during winter time, where we use skid steers or pickup trucks or different volunteer type vehicles to move 3 to 5, we're talking 20 to 40 foot tall trees that are taken from outside the buffer area and brought to the lake to be used for these fish sticks. They are they're anchored into the shoreline on shore here. And then after the ice goes out, those logs sink down into the lake bed and become habitat. Native plantings, 350 square feet. Again, at this land-water interface in the buffer zone is where these plantings would go. It has to be a minimum of 10 feet wide, but you can shape the native planting to fit your current parcel. So the block might be more of 18 feet by 9 feet, or it could be a backward where we have 10 feet of plantings here and then maybe a bigger space on the corner of the property. So the flexibility is there for the landowner to fit the planting to the property. And again, we're at the shoreland fringe where the land and water meets. You know, in Forest County, this might be spongy ground. This could be dry ground. So each of the plant in the Healthy Lakes Native Plant Guide, there's resources with both wet foot situation and dry foot situation. Here's that fact sheet I mentioned with some of the tips showing you how to walk through the practice. And then you can find this companion guide for the healthy plantings on the Healthy Lakes website. And it has these 6 planting options for you. The lakeshore edge we talked about, helping pollinators through the bird and butterfly planting. Maybe you have a bare soil area and a challenge around erosion. That would be number 3 to stabilize that area. Perhaps your view corridor is important to you and you want to maintain that view by having low growing vegetation instead of taller stuff. This option's for you, number 4. Deer resistant. Deer can be a challenge with trying to restore native plant populations in the Northwoods. And so this suite of plants is less favored by deer. And then number 6 is a woodland option dealing with shade. And again, just to show you, every one of the Healthy Lakes 6 options has a dry soil or a wet soil example. And then it lists out the 3 types of vegetation we need to use following the state standards for our planting: a woody component, a grass, sedge, and rush component, and a wildflower component. Here's just an example from the guide of our low growing option. It gives you a sense of how to lay the plants out and helps you visualize how you might put those plants onto the landscape. And here are those root structures we've been talking about for some of these shoreline plants. The top 3 are some of our common sedges we find along the shore. This is pictures from a UW Arboretum study that Joy Zedler and her class did. This is just 1 year of growth on these wetland plants. And look at already the fibrous structures of these sedges, or black-eyed Susan, ox-eyed daisy, or blue vervain. Again, these root structures can get down 5, even 10 feet into the soil for some of our grasses. Next up, here's that diversion. Here's that idea of a water bar. Again, instead of all this water shooting down to the lake and carrying the sediment and phosphorus, let's send it to a safe area using this water bar and infiltration type setup. The companion guide for this practice is controlling runoff and erosion from your waterfront property. This guide is on the website and is there to help walk you through the practice. Likewise, it coaches you through how to do this best practice, the rock infiltration. Here's an example of a drip line along a roof. We have a drain of rock here that is into the ground to grab that water from the rooftop and not let it make its way down this hill. Instead, it has a chance to be infiltrated to our rock infiltration area along the building here. Here's another example, all the runoff coming from this hard structure, the driveway. Instead, you can see how it was carrying sediment and water here. It would just shoot beyond here and start to cause problems to the lake. Well, now it's being intercepted and captured in this infiltration area. One of the maintenance things that might come up is you might have to, over time, remove this rock, clean the rock out, and put it back over the 10-year life of the project. And then last is that rain garden option. Again, it's a mix of diverting water off of something like a downspout, or in this case, a driveway and access area again, letting this water come in and be infiltrated through this native planting. And these wild native plants also help support things like our migratory birds and pollinators that need our help. Here's a freshly planted one and a link to a rain garden webinar that kind of walks you through the whole thing in a little more detail. There's guides on the Healthy Lakes and Rivers website to walk you through rain garden projects. And here's an example of what those guides look like. Also, I just wanted to let you know we didn't talk tons about wood here. Greg Sass, who was going to be with us originally, has a whole webinar located here talking about the science that we didn't have time for here maybe today around woody habitat. I encourage you to check this session out and dig into deeper as to why these fish sticks can really make a difference. Likewise, I share here an overview webinar for Healthy Lakes and Rivers, just that goes longer than what I'm able to share with you here today. The deadline again is November 1st with a meeting with that lake or river biologist by September, we hope. You have 2 years to complete the grant. It's a 75-25% grant match. 10-year contract is put on the best practice, and information is on that frequently asked question fact sheet on the website. And there's also a little tutorial on the website walking you through how to do a good application. Here are the numbers. In the 5 years of the program, we've almost made $1 million investment through our grants program with Healthy Lakes and Rivers. The most common practice to date has been native plantings, but I'm happy to say that we're starting to get traction with diversions and rock infiltration type practices as well, with over 500 properties participating in 29 counties across Wisconsin. Here's what that website looks like. The information, those fact sheets is under here. The companion documents, there's the grant resources, 5 steps to funding is there, as well as that video I mentioned. So all this information is available on this Healthy Lakes, wi.com standalone website for the Healthy Lakes and Rivers program. I just wanted to let you know, Forest County Land and Water Conservation Department also gets shoreline restoration and other water conservation type cost share money through DATCAP, the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection. Scott's office there, Scott Goodwin, is the county conservationist, and they do great work. And you can reach out to them at this website. This is also sometimes the money that's used for those bigger projects that might be beyond the scale of Healthy Lakes and Rivers. Allie's going to be up next talking about the other aspects of the DNR Surface Water Grant Program, and there's other funding available within that programming to our grant options that allows you to go into shoreline work and other water conservation type grant projects in bigger form. So up next is Allie. With that, I just want to see the way rubber hits the road here is people like Silver Lake, who have jumped in to date from Forest County to do Healthy Lakes and Rivers projects. It really takes that local commitment and teaming up with people like Scott and the grant specialists and other partners to pull these projects off. So thank you for what you do to make Forest County area waters better, and I'll happily take any questions.
Thanks, Patrick, for that intro to the Healthy Lakes program. Hi, I'm Allison McCulloch, and as Gretchen opens my presentation here, I'll just give a quick introduction. I'm the Lakes and Rivers team leader for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. I live in Madison, and I help coordinate the state's Surface Water Grant Program that provides funding for protecting and restoring Wisconsin waters. Next slide. Grants through the Surface Water Grant Program are available for grassroots organizations to conduct surface water management from start to finish. The grant program is designed to help you access funds to support your work. And each year, hundreds of lake groups and river groups and local units of government apply for this funding to support an incredible diversity of projects for their lakes, their rivers, their watersheds, and aquatic invasive species. The Healthy Lakes and Rivers program that Patrick just spoke about is just one of the very many programs that this larger funding umbrella supports. So today I'm going to introduce the larger program and hopefully encourage you to take advantage of this as an opportunity. So we'll have 4 main parts of the talk today: a quick overview covering the program's design and purpose, and then I'll go into some funding options, some more specific sub-programs and the kinds of projects that we support. I'll lay out a few tips on getting a grant and then introduce you to some resources that can help you along your journey. Next slide. So first of all, the overview. Let's talk about the program, big picture. Next slide. The Surface Water Grant Program is competitive. We offer cost-sharing grants that support surface water protection and restoration that operate on a reimbursement basis. So that's kind of the brass tacks of the program. This year, we have around $5 million to award. And that $5 million includes 2 main sources of funding. The majority comes from a gasoline excise tax that's calculated using the number of boat registrations. So it's kind of the gas that ends up in motorboats. And a small amount in addition comes from the Clean Water Act. Next slide. The legislature has charged the department to use these funds for grants that protect and improve waters of Wisconsin. And you can do this in 3 different ways. There are 3 separate funding sources within the larger amount of money that we have to spend here that support either lake projects directed at water quality and improving habitat, or purchasing land for permanent protection or preventing pollution. We have money for rivers projects that have kind of the same sorts of goals as the lakes projects. You'll see shoreline stabilization, connectivity projects sometimes in rivers. And then we have a funding source for AIS, where we focus on preventing the spread of aquatic invasive species, population assessment, planning, and population management. Next slide. So within those larger pots of lakes, rivers, and AIS funding streams, there are many options for individual projects that we support. Next slide. In general, projects fall into 2 categories: education and planning, and management. Education is kind of, getting the word out, training, workshops, developing organizational capacity, building your lake organization so it's more effective. And then management is the doing stuff: protecting and improving water quality, installing best management practices, carrying out the recommendations of a management plan. So you can see, I think one of the real strengths of the program is that it covers surface water management from start to finish. If you need to organize or educate or build your organization to start managing, all the way through collecting the data you need to make management decisions, planning what you're going to do, designing projects, and then full scale through implementation. So it's a pretty big program. Next. But within the broader categories of planning and management, there are 7 different sub-programs that you might consider. It's education, planning, restoration, implementation, AIS control, and then county programs. If you want to get the word out and you want to teach your members new skills or develop the capability of your organizations, you might want to look at an education grant. They're available, and the cap is $5,000. If you want to collect data on your water bodies so you can do better management planning or write a management plan, a surface water planning grant can help you there. For lake, river, and wetland restoration work, these are larger projects, up to $50,000 is available to fund approved shoreline and in-water management practices. If, however, you already have a lake management plan, up to $200,000 per project is available to implement it. When we think about AIS control, there are $25,000 grants available for prevention. And if you have an AIS population in your water body that's causing adverse impacts, you can access money for control. Between $50,000 to $150,000 is available there per project. Next slide. Okay, so we've got a grant program and you want to change the world, or maybe at least your backyard or your lake. How can we help? There are 3 main steps to consider right out of the gate. So first of all, you need to make sure you're an eligible organization. Second, you need to decide what you want to do with the money. And then third, you need to apply for the funding. So first step, next slide, is to confirm your organization's eligibility. Grants are available for grassroots surface water management organizations, nonprofits, local units of government, tribal governing bodies, schools, universities. Individuals aren't eligible for grants except in a small handful of circumstances. So first, you'll need to make sure that you represent, you're involved with an eligible organization, or you find an eligible organization to serve as your partner so you can access grant funding for your project. Automatic eligibility is granted to tribal governing bodies, counties, municipalities, local units of government, and lake districts. If you're a lake organization or lake association, a river management organization, or school district, you'll need to apply for eligibility. And it's a good idea to do this very early. I would say by May 1st at the latest, because sometimes the approval process can take a little while. So first step, eligibility. Second step is to develop your project. It's always a good idea to work in partnership with local entities that are aligned with your purposes. Lake management challenges, surface water management challenges can be pretty large and pretty complex sometimes. Often the more relationships that you have, the better you're able to meet those complex challenges. So reach out to your partners early, find people to work with you. And second, you'll need to work with your local biologist. The program is incredibly competitive, and it seems to be getting more competitive every year. Your local folks, Scott Vinegrin and Carol Warden, are just fantastic resources. They've dedicated their lives to this work. They really understand lake management and protecting and restoring our waters, and they are on hand and happy to help you design an effective project that'll make important contributions to our natural resources. Next. If you want to check out some of the projects that the program has funded in the past, sometimes that's a good way to get ideas. You can check out our story map online. This link is found in our grant program website. It's kind of buried on the side of the page. It usually works for me to do just a Google search, WDNR Surface Water Grant Story Map. I would try that, but you can kind of browse through the 2020 projects and see the work that we're covering in the program. Next slide. If you're not sure where to start, the program that Patrick presented on, the Healthy Lakes and Rivers program, is a fantastic first step into the grant world. The program at this time is non-competitive, and it's designed to be really easy and really streamlined to support DIY kinds of practices. Since 2015, we've funded almost 1,000 practices on over 500 water bodies or water properties. So, I'd really recommend this as a good first start. In the chat at the beginning of the talk, we heard a lot of people interested in shoreline protection, and the Healthy Lakes and Rivers project is a great first step. Next. Okay, so step 3, you've set your sights on a project, you've worked with your local biologist and your partners to kind of figure out what you want to do. The next step is to apply for funding. The application is available online, and it essentially collects information that we'll need to kind of understand what and where you want to do work. You're going to describe the goals and objectives of your project in detail, and then that application will be reviewed and scored. We award funding in the order of your project score, so we try to use the money in the wisest fashion possible. And we'll award money until it essentially runs out for each sub-program. The first date to put on your calendar if you're interested in coming into the grant program is September 2nd. At that time, you'll need to have a pre-application ready. So that's like the first drop dead date. But again, the earlier you start the process, planning and working with Scott and Carol and others, the better off you're going to be. So contact early, start early, and then you'll work sort of through the spring and summer on an application eventually to submit on September 2nd. Yes, thank you. Applying. Yep. Okay, so a few resources that are available to help you in your journey, more information and contacts. A great site is our website. It's on the DNR's webpage under the aid, the URL. It's much easier to just Google surface water grants, or you might need to add WDNR depending on your Google algorithm. That always works for me. You'll find on that website all the information you'll need to understand the grant program, including that applicant guide that you see a photo of right there. So detailed program descriptions, instructions, how to apply. It basically has everything that you'll need to know. If you want more information, I encourage you also to sign up for our GovDelivery newsletter. You can find the link right at the top of that website. So sign up there and you'll get important project and program updates. If you have any general questions, feel free to reach out to me personally or contact the DNR Surface Water Grants mailbox and someone will get back to you. Our team is on hand to help. So Scott, Carol, myself, Laura, Alex, we're here to help you. Let us know. And finally, I think my timer is going off. Hold on. Great. No. Okay. Hope you're not hearing that. Anyways, I think this program is great. I love working with it. I love the work that we do. This dedicated funding source can help do a lot of really good work for lakes, water bodies, wetlands, aquatic invasive species. It's a great example of the DNR and community members working together to improve and protect natural resources. So as you think about the future for your lake, consider the grant program. If you have opportunities that could benefit from financial assistance, please let us know. We'd be happy to work with you to pursue support. And that's all I have at this moment. Thank you. I'd like to turn it over to Scott Vinegrin now. He's going to share some examples of the Surface Water Grant Program in action. He's going to highlight some of the great work that's been carried out in Forest County, and a lot of it has been grant supported. So I'll turn it over to Scott.
There we go. Unmute. That helps. So I just want to finish up here by providing you some ways that you as lake citizens can engage with the Lakes Partnership to help understand and protect lakes. I hope to provide some pretty quick examples of Forest County lake groups that have taken different approaches so that you can start to connect with each other around shared concerns and projects. And of course, I work for the DNR, so I'm going to talk about this largely from a DNR perspective, largely related to grants and monitoring. And I guess I would have to say that I'm the DNR Lakes biologist for Forest County, but I'm part of a team of people that works together to help facilitate lake partnerships. And that includes staff at Trout Lake Station, Carol Warden, and Susan Knight. We also have Ty Krajewski, who helps us with aquatic plant management and shoreline monitoring. Al Wirt helps with aquatic invasive species detections in the Rhinelander office. Sandy Wickman helps organize our Citizen Lake Monitoring program for our counties up here. And Kevin Gothier is my counterpart who covers a few other counties in this part of the state. With that, I'll hop into some examples. So I'm going to follow up on Allie by talking a lot about surface water grants. I'm fairly new to Forest County, but I've looked and there have been 132 surface water grants issued to Forest County lake organizations, towns, counties, and tribes since the mid-1990s. And as individuals living on lakes, often as lake biologists, we work through this process with lake groups that are just starting to lake groups that have been around for a while. So when lake groups are just getting going, what often they want to do first is understand their lake. And this means they want to collect baseline data. And what that usually entails for a lake is collect some water quality data on nutrients and water clarity, assess the watershed land use of the land around your lake, kind of do a survey of the shoreline and shallow water portion of a lake, the habitat there for fish and wildlife, inventory the aquatic plants in a lake, understand if there are invasive species present, gather the fisheries data that's available for the lake. Once you have all that ecological data on your lake and watershed, you gather the stakeholder concerns from people that live around the lake or in the watershed. You put their concerns together with the ecological information about the lake and come up with goals, objectives, action items, what we call an implementation plan to help make a lake better, to improve it, restore it, protect it. And Bear Lake in Forest County is an example of a lake group that did that. You can see their plan here. But I'm just gonna, you'll see this in my slides. Here's a list of all the lakes in Forest County that have done comprehensive lake management plans through our surface water grant program.
Scott, I'm not sure if you're sharing.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
I'm sorry about that. So here is a list of the lakes in Forest County that have done lake management plans. And I guess I would just point out that lake organizations are eligible for our grants for management planning, but also I'd point out that Forest County, if your lake group is too small or you don't fit our eligibility criteria, the county can apply for you and help you work on a lake management plan. Forest County Association of Lakes has applied for lakes in the past, as well as some of the towns in Forest County. So getting a grant is one way to understand baseline information about your lake, but our grant program is competitive, so not every lake association or applicant gets a grant every time. Another way that the DNR can help collect baseline data on lakes is through our DNR directed lakes monitoring. Now, I would say that we're limited in capacity, so we may be able to do about 1 lake per county per year of this data collection. But we do collect this data. And in DNR, in our minds, we're collecting physical, chemical, and biological baseline data on lakes to report on the health of lakes across the state and give EPA a lakes assessment for the state. But we can work together with local lake groups to collect this data because it's also helpful for you. If you have issues such as some of the core issues that lake citizens come up with listed here. So maybe some of the data we collect would be helpful. We try to pair our monitoring with lake groups that need baseline data. So I would say if you're a lake group that has failed to get a grant or you have an urgent need to collect data, please email me. And I keep a list of lake groups that need assistance with monitoring. We can't get to all of them, but I do keep a list and we try to help as we can as our interests intersect. So for our DNR directed lakes monitoring, here's just the things we collect. It's similar to what I said is needed in a comprehensive management plan. We collect water quality data for 2 years on nutrients and water clarity. We collect data on fish and wildlife habitat, aquatic plants. This image on the right is an image of a point intercept grid. So that's Lake Lucerne, who we did directed lakes monitoring on last year. And each point we stop our boat at in that grid of points over the lake and collect aquatic plants on a rake and see what kind of plants are there and how many. So it's an inventory of the plants. We also do an inventory of your shoreline vegetation, habitat and condition, and the amount of wood that's in the shallow water of the lake. In addition, we monitor for invasive species on the lake. So last year we worked on Lake Lucerne. Outside of DNR grants and us being able to monitor your lake, another way that as any citizen you can become involved in collecting baseline data on your lake is to become a citizen lake monitoring volunteer. And you see here the different types of information that can be collected as a volunteer. Each region in the state has a DNR Citizen Lake Monitoring Network coordinator, and in Rhinelander and for Forest County, it's Sandy Wickman. Sandy can get you trained to collect water clarity, water chemistry data, these other programs. Sandy is great to work with, and has a lot of experience, and she's very helpful. So if you're interested in collecting baseline data, I would get in touch with Sandy. In addition to Sandy, in each county, at least in our part of the state, we try to have a dissolved oxygen meter that's available to be on loan for citizens that need to measure that water quality parameter in lakes. And in Forest County, Neil Clemmy is the CLMN volunteer on Lake Lucerne, and he's the meter minder of the dissolved oxygen meter for the county. So you can reach out to Neil if you have a need to monitor dissolved oxygen in your lake. He maintains the meter and can explain to you how to use it. Now, sometimes in planning for lakes do a comprehensive management plan, and then there are larger situations and more data is needed than basic baseline data that we collect at the deep hole and the other data that I just talked about. Kentuck Lake is an example. And I'm just showing 2 aerial photos of Kentuck Lake here. one in a year with a bad algae bloom. The other, and in probably the majority of the years, Kentucky Lake is fairly clear. So when there are algae blooms like this, everybody really wants to understand why, and our baseline data doesn't really explain that thoroughly. So larger issues like this require additional funding and partnerships. So the graph here just shows chlorophyll and phosphorus in Kentucky Lake over about a 30-year period. It is a long-term monitoring site for the DNR, and they've had citizen volunteers on Kentucky Lake collecting this data for many years as well. So there's a lot of deep hole nutrient data and chlorophyll data. What you can see is the lake has periods where it's fairly stable with fairly good water quality, low phosphorus, low chlorophyll, and then periods where some years are really high algae blooms, some years are really low algae blooms. And we just don't have our heads wrapped around this. So we formed a stakeholder team involving the Kentucky Lake District, the DNR. We have some Trout Lake Station researchers helping with some of the data collection, the Sakagan Band of Ojibwe in Mo Lake, Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission, U.S. Forest Service, and the consulting firm Onterra have all partnered in collecting fish and water quality and crayfish data on this lake. So we're trying to gather more data to understand what's causing these long-term and short-term patterns in phosphorus. This is a whole nother talk, and I just want to give you guys a sense that some problems need more partnerships and more funding. And this is just a photo of Carl Watrous and Jeff Rubsum from Trout Lake Station out there using a very detailed profiler to collect centimeter level data from top to bottom every centimeter for not only dissolved oxygen and temperature, but chlorophyll. So an interesting thing you can see is that green line on the graph is a chlorophyll peak right below the thermocline. So that tells us where algae are specifically in the water column, and maybe that helps us get to better answers about if there's a solution for this. We're still investigating Kentucky Lake and likely will be as a stakeholder team for many years. I want to move on to other things that lake groups have focused on. Some lake groups have invasive species issues. This is just an illustration from a aquatic invasive species management plan from Silver Lake. You can see in the left side, they have done an herbicide treatment with funding from the DNR's grant program. The nice part about our grant program is it also pays for data collection. So you can see on the top right, the milfoil went down after the herbicide treatment, which is the dashed line substantially. You can see in the bottom right, which is other native plant species in the lake, that some of the native plant species declined as well. So collecting this data along with invasive species management helps us understand more as a partnership, understand what works in different situations, what doesn't, what does more damage than good. So we're evolving our research and management databases as we collect this data as part of our grants. And this is just another example, and the lakes that have in Forest County that have taken us up on invasive species control funding in Forest County. This is Roberts Lake, and you can see two examples of different smaller beds of milfoil in Roberts Lake that were hand pulled and how it looks from one year to the next. So again, tracking of another management technique to control aeration water milfoil. Then we get into protecting and restoring lakes. And you know, the quote that an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. One of our flagship programs in the Lakes Partnership is Clean Boats, Clean Waters watercraft inspections, where you put a volunteer or paid inspector at the boat landing that talks to boaters about removing invasive species from their boats and equipment. You can see the list of Forest County lakes that take the DNR up on this grant funding. And I would note that these are large lakes and lakes that have invasive species. So some of this goes back to research done at the Center for Limnology that tells us where to prioritize funding these kind of efforts. Larger lakes and lakes with invasive species. If you stop the invasives from coming out at those places, less lakes will be infected. And unless most of the lakes already have invasive species, it really pays to have prevention efforts where the invasive species exist currently. So it looks like Forest County is really doing it right there. And I guess talking about prevention, I just wanted to throw in that little Healthy Lakes logo, because here I talk about prevention for invasive species, but as Patrick mentioned, another easy grant to get from the DNR, something that everybody can do, is to prevent sediment and nutrients from running off your shoreline into the lake. I think one of the most important ways that I would tell lake groups that they can protect lakes is by protecting what's still whole, what's preserved already. So we do offer land acquisition and conservation easement grants to purchase land, to create conservation easements around lakes. In Forest County, we've given grants to the Northwoods Land Trust, your local land trust, to reach out to shoreline owners with undeveloped lots or parcels, as well as river shoreline owners that have undeveloped sections of river frontage. So letting those people know that there are ways that they can protect their private lands into the future to maintain fish and wildlife habitat and those benefits that land gives to the water. Also, the Pickerel Crane Lake District also purchased a parcel of land along the creek running between the two lakes with wetlands, a spring, and lake frontage on Crane Lake on it. So those are nice examples of land preservation in Forest County through our grants program. And move on to restoring waters. Here I have photos of a perched culvert on the left. This is the downstream end of this culvert. You can see that if a fish wanted to go up through the culvert, it would be pretty difficult to do so. On the right, this is the upstream end of the culvert, and that water is backing up, creating a flooded forest, and maybe pushing water back into the lake, creating higher water levels. So this is Swamp Creek near Lake Lucerne. But our surface water restoration grant category can fund replacement of failing or undersized culverts. This can help with passage of organisms, especially in trout streams. It also reduces the risk of flooding roads or buildings. And Trout Unlimited has been a very active partner, as well as the Forest Service, in doing these types of projects on streams in Forest County, which is known, the county is known as the Wild Rivers area because the Wild Rivers state area is there. There's a lot of trout water, streams and rivers in Forest County. Forest County and the town of Lincoln are currently applying for grants to fix some of these issues. And I guess other things that can be done with our surface water restoration grant category are larger shoreline restorations that can't be covered. They're larger than what a Healthy Lakes project would cover. These might be serious erosion issues in lakes, as well as aeration to prevent winter kill. So Crane Lake received funding to put an aerator in their lake years ago. Little Rice Lake is trying to do the same in the near future. So that gets me through the grants portion. Another way to engage with the Lakes Partnership is through education. I know people have already touched on Science on Tap. I guess I just wanted to throw out another plug. Susan Knight and Carol Warden, as part of our team, helped to organize this, as well as Noah. And if you miss it, and I know in Forest County, you might not want to drive the hour to Minocqua, but you can watch it online. And if you go to the website, just Google Science on Tap, the presentations like this one from Peter David on wild rice and Patrick's talk on native plant gardening are archived, so you can watch them later. And I guess I just have to kind of end by putting a pitch out to our big educational event that happens every year. We tended to call it the Lakes Partnership, the Lakes Convention. We've expanded it to mean lakes, rivers, and wetlands. And this year, since it's going to be online again, it will be a whole week of Wisconsin waters discussions from professionals, from scientists, from citizens like yourself. And I guess I would say, if any of you have lake projects you're interested in talking about during Wisconsin Water Week, tomorrow is the deadline to submit a presentation for the Wisconsin Water Week if you want to share some good work you've done. So Google Wisconsin Water Week and you can get there. That's all I have. Guess we'll try to answer some questions here. Thanks everybody for tuning in today.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I just want to say a few words here. I know we're way over time, and I think that's a testament to the fact that there's so much to talk about, and we've had so many different angles here. It was a veritable smorgasbord of information about lakes, and I think the best thing is to cut it off. I know that there still is some Q&A happening in the Q&A box online, so we can allow those to close out. And if people in the audience still do have some questions, put them in the Q&A and we'll hold on. But I know we're at least a half an hour over our time frame, and I know people may need to leave or people may need to go to the bathroom or whatever. So I just want to thank everyone who has joined in, whether you're from Forest County or the surrounding area. All of the panelists were great. For us, this was just a sort of a big experiment. Hey, there's a pandemic. Let's do this thing and see how it goes. And I personally think it was really exciting and really successful. And so thank you everyone for participating. And I think, several of us will linger around and continue to try to finish off any of the questions that are in the Q&A box. So